Billionaire Richard Wallace sat motionless in the corner of the hospital room, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling the air. The monitors beeped steadily beside his daughter's bed, but the sound brought him no comfort. Emily, his only child, had been in a coma for 2 long, silent months following a devastating car crash. Once a lively, bright-eyed girl full of laughter and light, she now lay still, her delicate face drained of color, her chest rising and falling only because machines made it so. Richard had poured his vast wealth into her care, flying in the world's best neurologists, hiring private specialists, even funding experimental therapies in hopes of waking her. But no matter how much he spent, nothing changed. The room was filled with the best that money could buy, except for the one thing he truly needed, a miracle. Outside the hospital, reporters camped for any update, turning her coma into national headlines. The world watched with curiosity. But inside this cold room, it wasn't about tabloids or stock prices. It was about a father, lost, broken, and utterly powerless. Every day, Richard whispered stories to her, held her hand, and begged the universe for one more chance. She was all he had left. His wife had died young. Business had been his only distraction. Emily had been his light, his purpose. And now, that light flickered dangerously close to darkness. Doctors had started using words he wasn't ready to hear: permanent damage, low response probability, and the most chilling of all, prepare yourself for the worst. As a man who'd built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and stood atop skyscrapers bearing his name, Richard had never known what it meant to be truly helpless. Until now. He watched the stillness of his daughter's form and felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not even grief, but surrender. Not to defeat, but to the aching truth that he couldn't fix everything. All the money in the world couldn't wake her. And yet, as he sat there, shattered and silent, the seeds of something unexpected, something beyond logic or power, were quietly being sown outside those hospital walls. Something, or someone, was on the way. Rain poured steadily, soaking the pavement outside the hospital as Richard Wallace stepped out, his tailored coat doing little to shield the chill creeping through his bones. The gray sky mirrored the storm inside his heart. He needed a moment away from the endless beeping machines and hopeless stares of doctors. Lighting a cigarette he wouldn't finish, he stared blankly at the wet ground, unaware of the small figure huddled near the entrance. She stood barefoot, drenched, clutching a wilted bouquet of wildflowers. Her clothes were threadbare, her hair tangled, and yet there was something arresting about her, something still. Richard might have walked past her without a second thought, as he often did with the world beyond his glass towers. But then, her voice broke through the rain. "Sir," she said gently, "I can wake your daughter." He stopped mid-step, unsure if he'd heard her right. Slowly, he turned to face her. The girl looked no older than 11, fragile and trembling, yet her gaze was unwavering. Richard furrowed his brow, anger rising with confusion. Was this a sick joke? Another desperate plea for attention or money? But before he could speak, she added, "Please, just let me try. I won't hurt her." There was no demand in her tone, no hysteria. Just quiet certainty. Richard stared into her eyes, searching for the scam, the madness, anything that could explain away what she'd just said. Instead, he found something he hadn't seen in weeks: hope. Faint, flickering, but real. He almost laughed at the absurdity. A billionaire taking advice from a street child. But in that moment, logic didn't matter. Something about her presence tugged at his soul, like she belonged to a part of the world that understood pain, loss, and miracles better than he ever could. Without a word, Richard tossed the cigarette into a puddle, took one last glance at the hospital doors, and said quietly, "Follow me." And so, the man with everything walked back inside, trailed by a girl who had nothing but a handful of dying flowers, and the belief that she could bring life. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of machines and the overcast light seeping through the windows. When Richard led the barefoot girl in, nurses gasped. Security rushed to intervene, but he raised a firm hand, silencing everyone. "She's with me," he said. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of authority few dared to question. The girl moved slowly, reverently, as if she understood the sacredness of the moment. Richard's heart thudded in his chest. Part of him still thought this was madness, letting a stranger, a child off the street, near his comatose daughter. But something deeper, unexplainable, told him to trust. She approached the bedside, where Emily lay pale and unmoving. The girl looked at her with a tenderness far beyond her years, then gently placed her small hands over Emily's. She closed her eyes. Silence filled the room. Then, from her lips came a lullaby. No one recognized the words. It wasn't English, maybe not even a language at all. But the melody was pure, aching, and full of something no machine could replicate: soul. It floated through the room like a breeze through an open window, gentle, comforting, almost celestial. Richard stood frozen, tears forming as he clutched the bed rail. He didn't know whether to fall to his knees or call for help. The nurses exchanged wary glances. Time itself seemed to slow. Then, a twitch. Emily's fingers moved. The monitors beeped erratically, no longer a monotonous rhythm but a spark of life. "She moved," a nurse shouted. "She moved." Doctors burst in. The girl stepped back silently, allowing them room. One leaned over Emily, speaking her name. And then, her eyes opened. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse, but unmistakably real. Richard staggered back, choking on a sob. For the first time in months, hope didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt alive. He rushed to her side, holding her hand, kissing her forehead, overcome with gratitude. But even through his joy, his eyes searched the room, for the girl. She stood quietly in the corner, unnoticed by most. But Richard saw her. And he would never forget. The morning sun cast a golden hue across the hospital garden, a soft warmth cutting through the chill of the night before. Birds chirped quietly as the world stirred awake, but for Richard Wallace, the world had already changed. He sat on a bench beside the barefoot girl. Now wrapped in a hospital blanket, a cup of warm tea in her hands. She looked so small beside him, yet the weight of what she had done made her presence enormous. He studied her in silence, still reeling from the impossible. His daughter, Emily, was awake. Speaking. Smiling. Breathing on her own. And it wasn't medicine or science or money that had done it, it was her. "How?" he finally asked, his voice softer than usual, almost reverent. "How did you do that?" The girl didn't look at him at first. She stared ahead at the rose bushes, her fingers curled around the cup. Then she smiled, bittersweet, quiet, full of memories too heavy for someone her age. "My sister," she began, eyes glistening. "She was in a coma, too. A long time. I sang to her every day. No one thought she could hear me, but I knew she could. She never woke up, but before she passed, she smiled. Just once. I think she left something with me. A gift. To help others." Richard said nothing. He was a man of logic, of results. He'd never believed in fate or miracles. But here he was, listening to a child who'd spent nights on sidewalks and still found it in her heart to give. The girl turned to him and added quietly, "I don't have a home. But maybe I was supposed to be here, for her. For Emily." And in that moment, everything inside Richard shifted. This girl, nameless to the world, unnoticed by society, had given him back his heart, his daughter, his soul. She had nothing, and yet gave him everything. He reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. "You do now," he whispered. "You have a home. No headlines. No cameras. Just a man, a girl, and a garden where something sacred had bloomed, the power of love, unspoken but unforgettable. The afternoon sun bathed the countryside estate in golden light, casting long shadows across the sprawling garden. Laughter echoed through the crisp air, light, free, and healing. Emily, her cheeks rosy and eyes bright with life, ran barefoot through the grass, hand in hand with the girl who had once stood in the rain with nothing but a wilted bouquet and an impossible promise. Now, that same girl was nearly unrecognizable, clean, well-fed, and dressed in soft, new clothes. But her spirit hadn't changed. She still carried that quiet strength, that gentle magic in her eyes. She giggled alongside Emily, spinning in circles, hair dancing in the wind. For the first time in a long time, their joy was real. Pure. Untouched by grief or fear. On the porch, Richard watched them with a stillness that came not from exhaustion, but from peace. A mug of untouched coffee sat beside him as he leaned back in his chair, arms folded, lips curled into a quiet smile. His world, once built on power and wealth, had found a new foundation. One rooted not in numbers, but in souls. He was no longer just a billionaire. He was a father, twice over. Inside his mansion were marble floors, priceless art, and walls that had once echoed with silence. Now, they echoed with footsteps, with stories, with life. And in his heart, something had shifted forever. He knew now that miracles didn't always come in the way the world expected. They didn't arrive in limousines or in headlines. They didn't wear lab coats or fly in from elite universities. Sometimes, miracles came barefoot and shivering. Sometimes, they stood at your door holding dying flowers and asking for a chance. And sometimes, they saved your world. Richard's eyes welled with tears he didn't try to hide. Not anymore. He had everything. Not because he had conquered the world, but because he had been humbled by it. Because a little girl, forgotten by all, had reminded him what it meant to love, and to truly live. In that garden, beneath the sun, among laughter and second chances, a new family had bloomed, unexpected, undeserved, and utterly beautiful.